Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining our pressure canning for low acid foods class. My name is Amber Webb. I am the Family Consumer Sciences Extension Agent with Larimer County, and I'm so excited to have you here today. This is such a fantastic topic, and getting more information about this one specifically in food preservation, I think is so important. There's a lot of food safety considerations, but it's a fantastic way to preserve food if you've got a fall-time bounty. So let's get started. Now, there's two different methods of canning, and I'll mention this just briefly because we get this question a lot. What's the difference between using a boiling water bath canner and a pressure canner? And that all comes down to the pH of a food. So is it acidic, or is it a high acid food, or is it low acid food? And that really is the separation. So higher acid foods, things like fruits, pickles, jams, and jellies, are really meant for boiling water bath canning, and those have a pH of 4.6 or less. On the other hand, if you have any kind of a low acid food, whether that's vegetables, meat, poultry, fish, mixed foods, such as soups, that kind of thing, those are all going to be considered low acid foods. And it's very important that you pressure can these kinds of foods. Okay, now why is that? Really, it comes down to Clostridium botulinum. So if you've not heard of this, most people have. Really, the only safe way to can it, can low acid foods, is because of that, right? So yeast, molds, and most bacteria are destroyed at boiling temperatures. That's 212 degrees at sea level. But Clostridium botulinum spores, they require higher temperatures for destruction. So 240 degrees or above at sea level. Now, spores can't germinate in acid foods of that 4.6 or below. So you're not concerned about Clostridium botulinum in high acid foods because of that specific piece, okay? But in order to destroy them, you need higher temperatures, and you're not going to get those higher temperatures of 240 or above in a water bath canner. It's just not possible. So pressure increases temperature, right? So you have the PSI here. So 10 PSI. PSI stands for pressure per square inch gauge. So the pressure is resulting from the force of 1 pound of force applied to an area of 1 square inch. Okay, so think about a pressure canner and all the pressure that's inside of it versus the atmospheric pressure around it. Creating that pressure increases that temperature. Okay. Now, there's different kinds of pressure canners. So I'm going to break this down for you a little bit. So think about what you already have at home, potentially, what's been gifted to you. We've had some really beautiful canners that have come from generations before that are still working, that are still doing a fantastic job. Or if you're in the market for something new, there's some different considerations that you need to make. So you can see here, I have 2 pressure canners. They have some similarities. So they both have a flat rack bottom. You can see that photo there, or in the photo, and that's so that there is some, even just the thinnest separation between your jars and the bottom of the canner. We don't want those knocking around. We don't want direct heat on those jars from the bottom of the canner. So just a little bit of separation is important. You also have either a dial gauge or a weighted gauge. So the dial gauge is on the right, and then on the left, you have a weighted gauge canner, okay? Some similarities are that they both have a vent pipe or a port for pressurizing. So you can see that right in front, you've got that vent pipe, so on the right-hand side. Now so on the front, we also have safety valves for overpressuring, okay? So you can see right on the front, there's 2 safety valves, and you know that that is going to help you with pressure as you move through the process. You're also going to have a flexible gasket on the inside underneath part of that lid. It's just a big rubber band, basically, and that helps to seal the canner very nice and tightly. It's also called a sealing ring in some manufacturers' books. Okay. Now, a dial gauge is a really great way to use a pressure canner. And I would say for me, that's my most comfortable way of using it because it gives you the exact pressure inside the canner. Now, you do need to check these yearly for accuracy, but it gives you that flexibility of knowing exactly where you're at inside the canner. And now it does have a counterweight to close and open the vent for pressurizing. That counterweight isn't supposed to be used for pressure. And then your pressure is increased or decreased by adjusting the burner heat. So as you change that heat on your burner, you'll see that dial change and you'll know exactly where you need to be, okay? Now, there's a couple different kinds of weighted gauge canners that are available out there. So the weighted gauge you see here on the top is just, it looks, it's about the size of a big coin, and it's a one-piece gauge, and it's fitted for 5, 10, or 15 pounds of pressure per square inch. And you can see, if you kind of look real closely, that 5 and that 10 and that 15 are imprinted right on that gauge. And depending on where you are, where your altitude is, you would put that number 10 or 15 right on top of your vent pipe. And that is where you know where your gauge needs to be, okay? Now, there's also 3-piece gauges that you can use. And those have the weights that you add directly on top of it. So they look like little nuts almost. And that's just a different model that's available to you, okay? So those two things here. Now, right in the center of this screen, you're seeing there's a dead or a counterweight. That is specifically used for a dial gauge canner, and that's used in conjunction with it because you're watching on your dial gauge where you need to be. And once you get to that point, then you put this counterweight on top of your venting pipe. And I'm going to talk you through that process. I know it might seem a little bit vague at this point. I have step-by-step instructions, but just so you can get a visual of what these two different weighted gauge looks like, and then what the dead or counterweight looks like, so that you know that you're using the right kind of equipment for the purpose of pressure canning. Now, something I do want to mention with this weighted gauge, you might already know this, but what's interesting is they're designed to do this jiggle motion, and it will rock and it'll jiggle when it's maintaining the correct pressure. And depending on your brand and the manufacturer, they will have different timings of jiggles. I know it seems very vague, but once you read it and test it out and experience it for the first time, you'll really understand. You know that it'll be functioning properly when you can do that timing according to the manufacturer, okay? And it really, again, it's just indicating that the canner is maintaining the right recommended pressure that it's supposed to be maintaining, okay? Now, there's another kind of pressure canner that's so interesting. If you've not seen this, this often is brought to our office for testing. And this is called an All-American brand. And it's a little bit different because it has a dial gauge on it, and it also has a weighted gauge on it. What's so tricky about this one specifically is that it actually is a weighted gauge pressure canner. And the dial is only there, it's only serving as an additional safety step so that you can know that it's exactly where it's supposed to be. And you can see that it has these very large twisting, locking pieces to it that hold it together. So it's not like a twist on with a rubber band underneath it, like the ones that I showed you previously. This one is much larger. It can handle more jars. It's just a bigger kind of a beast of a canner. It's great to use, but I think it just has a little bit more, it's kind of a little bit more fussy than the other kinds of canners are, but it's a fantastic piece of equipment to use. Okay, so we get these questions as well. What's the difference between a pressure canner and a pressure cooker? Can I can inside of my pressure cooker? And the answer is no. So to be considered a pressure canner, for USDA processes that have done all of the research and the testing, the canner must hold at least 4 quart-sized jars. I'm going to turn my camera back on here so you can see this here is a quart-sized jar, and here's a pint. So a pressure cooker might be able to hold a pint jar, but you'll see that most pressure cookers are not going to be able to hold a pint jar, okay? Now, pressure cookers and saucepans that have smaller volume capacities just are not going to be able to be used in canning. And enough heat may not be delivered during pressurizing in the cool down periods in smaller pressure canners or cookers, okay? Because that heating up time and that releasing time of the releasing of pressure is so critical in food safety. The cookers are just not designed to do that, okay? Now, we also get questions about electric multi-cookers. So things like Instant Pot, those kinds of brands. Some of those manufacturers do say, they claim that their appliances are acceptable for canning and preserving, but the USDA emphatically does not endorse using their canning because they're not designed to maintain the heat that's required in pressure canning for safely preserving foods at home. And again, they're not the right size either. They need to be of a larger size so that it can get pressurized and then depressurize in the same way that you can on a stovetop, okay? However, these manufacturers have started putting out electric pressure canners that are different from their pressure cookers. And those are considered safe because they're designed in just a different way that the cookers are designed. It's very hard to get your hands on one of these right now, and they run several $100s, but they have been available at one point, and I have heard good things about them. So eventually, hopefully, our agents statewide will be able to get our hands on these electric pressure canners to do some research and to do some work and experience these. I think they could be a really great tool for the future. Now, with all that in mind, what you have really is an electric cooktop, right? So before you use your oven, if you've not used your oven for the first time for pressure canning, make sure that you check with the manufacturer, okay? Some smooth top ranges aren't suitable for canning. They can get cracked, they can get damaged. Some electric ranges just don't generate enough heat consistently to be able to build pressure. And then also a canner should be no more than 4 inches wider in diameter on the element that is heated. So I have in my office a special glass top stove that does meet all of the recommendations with the manufacturer. So just know what kind of equipment that you're using and if it's suitable for canning, okay? Now, the next step in getting set up is making sure that you have the right kinds of resources for pressure canning. You can absolutely go to our CSU Extension website to take a look at information that we have there. I will be emailing you fact sheets that give you step-by-step instructions that are also adjusted for altitude, and I'll mention that in a second. But you can also go to our Preserve Smart website or app that we developed to help you with research-tested recipes. The National Center for Home Food Preservation is another really great one. This is the national university, really, that all of the extension offices kind of look to because they are also continually doing research. And they also have a website with all of their updated recipes, and they have a cookbook called So Easy to Preserve. It's specifically for food preservation, all up-to-date tested recipes. Ball Blue Book, though, is really great. And then USDA Guide, Complete Guide to Home Canning is another good resource. So start here. If you don't find what you're looking for specifically for a specific recipe, I would recommend Googling your recipe, what you're looking for, and then state extension. So any extension service across the United States that has that research tested recipe could pop up for you. So it's a really great place to look, okay? Now, If you're joining from Colorado, this is just an assumption that you are. What you do need to know is that you need to make sure that you're adjusting your pressure canner for your altitude, okay? Now, you can go to a couple different places. So geoplanner.com, what's my elevation, to determine what your elevation is. And then you need to follow instructions for adjustments for your tested recipe, okay? Most recipes, if it's not from a specific altitude adjusted source like CSU, you need to make sure that you're adjusting, because most aren't going to have that for you. So you might look at a cookbook and it'll tell you what to do, and then it'll say adjust for altitude. That may not be right there on the page for you. It may. If you don't have it right on the page, most likely in the front or the back of the recipe book will have this kind of a chart for you, and it'll tell you exactly what you need to do. So for pressure canning, you need to increase the pressure according to temperature or according to the recipes, because atmospheric pressure gets lower as elevation increases. So think about even like when you're baking, you go up high in the mountains and you bake something there, there's less pressure, and that results in things rising more because there's nothing pressing down against it, or not as much atmospheric pressure pressing down against it. Same goes for canning. And so depending on what your elevation is, take a look here at your chart. Most likely you're probably between 4,000 and 6,000 feet. And so you need to increase your pressure to 13 pounds per square inch, excuse me. Also, anywhere you are in Colorado is above 3,000 feet. And that's also considered an altitude adjustment. So even in baking, anywhere you are in Colorado can benefit from adjusting for altitude, okay? Okay, so now that we've got that under our belt, I'm gonna walk you through the process of successful canning for pressure cooking, or for pressure canning, excuse me. It's so easy to get those two words mixed up. Okay, so you've got your tested recipe, you've read it through a few times, you know what the instructions are, you know step by step what you need to do. Okay, what's next? You need to plan uninterrupted time for canning. This is such an essential part because you really have to use all of your senses and not be distracted, or else things can go wrong pretty easily if you're not right on top of it. So make sure that you aren't going to be interrupted. And then you want to select your freshest ingredients. The freshest ingredients are going to give you the best and highest quality and most flavorful product at the end. So if you can do that, make sure that you have great ingredients. And then you'll need to assemble your equipment for canning. So your pressure canner, your jars, your lids, your jar lifter, the funnel to put your food in it, a bubble freer, a kitchen towel, or a cooling rack, because you don't want to put hot jars onto a cold countertop. Those jars could break, okay? Now, again, I'm going to send you the recipes that are available to you through CSU and the fact sheets. And so they will also cover these step-by-step instructions, okay? Now, what's next? So you're first going to put your pressure canner on your burner, and then put the rack inside of it, and then put about 2 or 3 inches of hot water into the canner, okay? And depending on the type of recipe that you're going to prepare, whether it's hot packed foods, so something like a vegetable soup recipe, you're cooking this first. You would heat up your water to 180 degrees versus something like carrots or beets that you raw pack, you just cut and you put in that jar. You only need about 140 degrees for that, okay? Now, you've got your water bath canner started, it's prepped, or your pressure canner, excuse me. Now you need to prepare your recipe as instructed. So once your recipe is ready to go, you need to fill your jars. And then you're going to, we've got some steps in between there. So making sure that you have the appropriate headspace and using a bubble freer to dip into your jar so that you can release some of those bubbles. And then you wipe the rim clean so that there's no food product on that rim of the jar. And then you put your lid on the jar, and then you screw the bands tight. So there's a lot of steps here, but there's a lot of important steps. So something I like to do when I talk about putting your bands on the jar is putting it on fingertip tight. And that's just using the strength of your fingers and not your whole hand, okay? So I'll demonstrate here. I like to just loosely screw it on until I meet resistance. And that's it, okay? I'm not gonna turn it any tighter. And sometimes I like to just, when it's on the countertop itself and it meets its resistance, I'll do that one more time. I'll just take that resistance and I'll let the jar twist, the entire jar twist a little bit further, and then it's ready to go, okay? Now, it's important that you have the opportunity for air to come out of the jar so it's not screwed on so tight, so that the inside of these can get a vacuum seal, okay? That vacuum seal is essential in sealing for food safety and for storage later on, okay? So if you're interested in learning more specifically about headspace, about like using the bubble freer, any more about that, you can actually watch one of my water bath canning classes, which is posted on our website. And I go into a lot more detail about that. Okay. So you're going to put the jars, lift them into the canner once they're all filled. And you want to keep those upright. So you can see here in the photo, nothing is being tilted. Just pick it up, move it over, put it down. It's because you don't want that seal to get ruined. And then you need to fasten your lid securely, and you're going to leave off the vent pipe. Okay, you want that vent pipe to be open because you need to let the canner vent. So in order to do that, you need to turn the heat setting to the highest position and then heat the water until it boils and the steam flows freely from that vent pipe. So here's a really good picture that shows steam coming out, okay? Once that steam comes out and you have a good, consistent exhaust, like which you're seeing right there, then you set a timer and you let that vent for continuously for 10 minutes, okay? Now, why do we do that? This stage is critical for pressure canning. So as the water boils in the canner, the empty space in that canner, because it's only a couple inches, right, becomes a mixture of steam and air. And the temperature of the steam and the air mixture is lower than the temperature of pure steam. And venting eliminates the air, so the processing takes place in a pure steam environment. Because processing times, all of that research that's been done are intended only for a pure steam environment, okay? So the USDA instructs to vent all pressure canners for 10 minutes to get that environment. And then without proper venting, up to 30% of sterilizing value of a 20-minute process could be lost. So you're also sterilizing your jars at the same time while you're processing. So keep that in mind too, okay? So there's a lot that goes into this, but if you follow the recipe and the directions precisely, you can get a really great final product, okay? Now, after the venting has occurred for 10 minutes, you place that counterweight, or if you're using a weighted gauge, onto that vent pipe, okay? And the canner will pressurize within 3 to 10 minutes. Now down here, I've got, I know that the photo is kind of blown up a little bit, but I've got a red circle, and this safety cover lock is now in place due to pressure beginning to build in the canner. So before it pressurizes, that is going to be down. It'll jiggle freely. And once it pressurizes, it's going to pop down and it's going to be solid. Okay, it's like going to be locked during that pressure state. Okay. Now, we want to start the timing process when the pressure reading on that dial gauge indicates the recommended pressure has been reached. So I'm just going to say 13 PSI for where I am, because I know that's what it is. So once the pressure starts going up, your dial gauge is going to start going up, and you know that you need to watch it until it gets to 13. Once it reaches that 13 or wherever you are, where you need to be, then you start your timing process. For most things like vegetables, it's at least 30 minutes. You start that timer. For weighted gauges, you need to start the timing of the process when the weighted gauge begins to jiggle or rock as the manufacturer describes. Okay, so one type of weighted gauge should have a certain number of times per minute, while another one might slowly rock throughout the process. So depending on what kind of weighted gauge you have, your manufacturer will tell you, like, oh, I can see that it's jiggling 15 times a minute. I'm just going to pull that out. I don't know specifically what that is, but you can count that on your timer, okay, on your watch, and get that specific timing going for you. Okay. Now, once you have that 13 pounds of pressure, whatever you need to be at, you need to regulate the heat under your canner to maintain that steady pressure, or just slightly above it. Okay. You can be a pound or two above. You never want to drop down below. Okay. So you need to stay at your oven and watch that gauge and make sure that it's at the correct pressure it needs to be at. Because if at any time the pressure goes below the recommended amount, you have to bring that pressure back up to where it needs to be and begin that timing over again from the beginning. Okay. This can be a bummer, but it is so important for the safety of food. Loss of pressure at any time can result in underprocessing or unsafe food. Okay. Now, I basically just said that again, but in a different kind of way. So it's important because also that loss of pressure can pull liquid from the jars. And any kind of variation, again, will produce underprocessing. And really, we're concerned about that foodborne illness, which is botulism. And I'll talk about that a little bit later on. But really, that's what you're concerned about in losing any kind of pressure during the canning process. Okay. Now, something also about forcing cooling your canners. So my next slide, I'm actually going to jump forward here and then jump back. So when your timed process is complete, you want to turn off the heat. You want to remove the canner from the heat if it's on like an electric burner, if possible, and then let it cool naturally. Because while the canner is cooling, it's also depressurizing. So it's so important not to force cool the canner, because it also will result in food spoilage. And then that's where we can get sick. Okay. So some people have asked about this. We get some calls about it. Can you cool down the canner faster? Because this is a very long process. This is not a quick thing. You really have to be dedicated to the time that it's going to take to do it. Some people have tried putting cold water over it, opening the vent pipe before it cools to zero, that dial gauge going back to zero, covering the canner with cool wet towels, placing the canner in a colder area like outside or in a cool air draft. It is not recommended. Please do not try these things. You can get seal failure under processing. You can warp the canner or the lid. You can get sick from foodborne illness. It could spoil your food. There's just so many things that can happen that are not worth trying to make it a faster process. So that's why it's so important that you block out enough time that you don't feel rushed. Okay. So once the canner is completely depressurized, that dial gauge has gone back to zero, wait a minute or two, and then slowly remove that weighted gauge or open up that petcock. It's the same thing. If you've got a weighted gauge, you need to also make sure that it depressurizes the same. The standard heavy walled canners, the older ones, if you have an older model, it's going to be about 30 minutes loaded with pints to cool down, or about 45 minutes if it's loaded with quarts. So just keep that in mind. The newer thin walled ones that I showed you, like the Presto brand, they're lighter. They're going to cool a lot more rapidly, and they're equipped with vent locks that are designed to open when the pressure is gone. So that vent lock in the front that I showed you before in that little red circle, that's going to open up, letting you know. Okay. Okay. Now, once it's gone down to 0, it's completely cooled, it's completely depressurized. Then you can unfasten the lid and remove it carefully. So you're going to lift the lid so it's locked into place. Just make sure that the underside is away from you, or that the outside is away from you. So you're going to tilt it and put the steam out and away and not towards your face so that you get burned. Okay. So then what's next? Your product is done. So you need to pull it out of the canner. So you're going to use that jar lifter to remove the jars one at a time without tilting, and put those on a towel or cooling rack with at least 1 inch of space between the jars, so that they have adequate time to cool all around the jars. Okay. And then this is the hard part. You need to let it sit undisturbed for 12 to 24 hours. Do not tighten those ring bands or push on the lids or do anything to the jars. You literally have to just leave them alone for 12 to 24 hours. And then at that point, you can check the lid to make sure that it is sealed appropriately. So again, I have here, this is the vegetable soup. It's concave. When I press on it, nothing happens. It's nice and sealed. And just to show you, here's another one I have. This is actually one of my master food safety advisors. This is a can of stewed meat that she did last year. And you can tell also this is concave. It's in very good shape. But what you do for storage is you actually remove the bands from the sealed jars, because we don't want any kind of residue to be on the inside of this of the jar. If you put the band on, if there's any residue, if there's any mold, if there's anything sticky, you're not going to know, and that's going to compromise your product. So you want to wash the jars, remove that residue, label it on top any way that you like, with a marker, with a sticker, and then store it in a cool, dry place. We recommend that you don't store your home canned foods for more than a year. You're really going to get the best quality in that year. Okay. Now, what happens? I'm going to take a little drink of water here. What happens when you're ready to pull this beautiful, I've got spicy tomato soup here, out of the pantry and cook this for your family? What comes next? So all pressure can food has to be boiled for 10 minutes plus 1 minute for each foot above sea level. So I'm here at about 5,500 feet. So I'm going to boil this for about 15 or 16 minutes to know that it is safe to serve to my family. Okay. You also need to carefully inspect, before you even do that, really inspect the jars before cooking your food. Okay. If the food looks spoiled, if it foams, if it has an off odor during heating, you want to discard it. Microwave heating is too uneven for heat and how that's distributed to be a safe method of reheating. So we don't recommend reheating. And reheating in a microwave or reheating on the countertop or the stovetop is not meant for foods that have been incorrectly processed. So you can't fix something that's wrong by boiling it for 15 minutes on the stove. It has to be done right the first time. Okay. Now, what do you need to do to inspect the jars? You want to make sure, well, first off, that you know that the pressure canner was operated properly, that the jar lid is firmly sealed and concave, that it doesn't move when it's pressed in the center. You want to make sure nothing has leaked from the jar, nothing spurts out of the jar when it's opened, that it doesn't have any unnatural or off odors, there's no signs of spoilage, there's no mold growing on the canned food or the surface of the food, you know that your product is going to be safe to eat if it checks off all of those boxes, okay? And that you preserved that food, right? Or that you know that you were there, you saw it preserved the first time, okay? Now, again, why is this so important? That's because of botulism. And we know that it's one of the deadliest food poisonings there are out there. And what's so tricky about it is it can contain the toxin without showing any signs. So you may not have any of the previous checklists showing, and it could still be present, right? So there are other foodborne illnesses that we can think of and that we're considering when we're boiling our food. But botulism is not one of those things. So if you eat a home pressure can food and you experience any of these symptoms within 12 to 24 hours, it could be because Clostridium botulinum was present, okay? If you get to the hospital as soon as possible, they can help you. It can also be, very serious for people, but medical intervention can absolutely help you, okay? So if you do suspect it, if you have any of the things that we just talked about, and you need to dispose of it, make sure that you're going to put it in a place where it's not going to be eaten by people or pets. So, don't dump this out into your open kitchen trash where your pets or anybody can get into it. And then one additional step is to boil it for 30 minutes for disposing it. And this destroys any toxin present and preventing it from spreading, okay? So considering who's all around you, it's an important step to make sure that people don't get sick, okay? Now, we've talked through a lot of different steps for pressure canning safely, and I'm going to show you some pictures of pressure canning gone wrong, okay? So this is just a word of warning. Again, in order to do it safely, just make sure that you do not leave your kitchen when you're processing. Have your dial gauge tested yearly, which I can do for you. And then also examine that gasket, the sealing ring, the vent pipe, make sure nothing is clogged, make sure everything is a good working condition, and then replace parts if needed. And the extension office can help you do all of those things, okay? Now, I'm not sure how old this was. I think this was from maybe the early 90s from a consumer, I think, in Greeley. And what you can see here, if you can see the picture very well, is that the pressure canner actually took off and it hit the vent hood above it and then went back down onto the oven and completely bent the oven itself. And it looks like it's knocked off a paper towel rack, just completely bent the oven itself, took out some cabinets, bounced around. You can see the explosion on the ceiling here of the food itself. Took out a coffee maker, and look at this. What's so interesting about this? So this person that was doing this canning actually did leave the kitchen. I don't know what for. It could have been an emergency or something, but the canner was left on the stove. And what happened was that the pressure went too high and they weren't able to bring the pressure back down low. So when you're at your stove and you're watching it carefully, you can make that adjustment. But this person was not able to make that adjustment. The pressure went too high, and the lid actually was on the canner. The lid stayed locked. What came off was it sheared off the bottom of the pressure canner. And so you can see that maybe here in the next picture too. So that's what broke, and what came off was the bottom. And you can see here in this photo that the dial gauge was at its extreme limit, and it stayed that way. So it just, completely blew out the whole unit by having that happen. This is always a horror story that people talk about, but it is possible. It still is possible if you're just not watching that gauge and watching the pressure, okay? So really, by avoiding that, we just make sure that you need to test that dial gauge yearly so that it's working accurately. And then I send in my master gauge yearly to get that tested, so that we know that we're testing it against a solid piece of equipment. And then what happens is if your dial gauge is off by 1 pound of pressure, in a 20-minute process, it can cause over a 10% decrease in sterilizing value, and then a 2-pound error can cause a 30% decrease. So it just really comes down to food safety. And so getting that tested yearly is critical in order to have a good, safe canning season. Okay, so we are at the end of the slideshow. Hopefully this was really informative for you, but also has given you some confidence that if you follow the instructions carefully and safely, and that you're using, up-to-date equipment, up-to-date recipes, you've got the timing, you've got the space, you've got that full process all lined up, and you follow the steps carefully, you can have a really successful and really enjoyable canning project. Okay. So thank you again for joining. I'm going to go ahead and stop with the recording, and then we will answer questions. Thanks again.